You're all present. Mr. Durst is here, Mr. DeGuerin, and Mr. Chesnoff. People are all represented. Mr. Henderson is at council table. And you are going to present another videotape or video recording of, it's not tape anymore, video recording of a witness.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. That's the Marshal equals 75. It's a DVD of the testimony of Marshal Kranes. DVD is 23 minutes long. The Marshal transcript is 75A. Can I see hands of anyone?
Yes.
The transcript?
Your Honor, obviously for the record, if it matters,
Pardon me?
if it matters for the record, I'm back. I was gone previously.
Of course it matters, Mr. Lewin.
You didn't notice? I don't know if it matters or not, but I'm here. Who is that?
That's lawyer on the people's team.
Your Honor, a big word on that? Playing people 75.
Marsha Kranes, Your Honor.
Yes.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you're about to give in the counsel before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Please be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name.
Marsha Kranes, M-A-R-S-H-A-K-R-A-N-E-S.
May receive. Ms. Kranes, have you ever testified in court before?
No.
Are you nervous right now? So, unfortunately, the court reporter, there's not really a key for
A little.
a little. If there's any question you don't understand from either side, just let us know. I have to ask you the question right off the top. What's your current age?
76.
Can you tell me what you do or did for a living after you retired?
I'm retired. I was a newspaper reporter and editor the last 30-odd years for the New York Post.
When did you retire?
At the end of 2006.
And when you retired, what was your position in the Post?
I was an editor and basically on rewrite at that point.
Can you tell me what kind of educational background you have?
I went to college.
And can you tell me where?
Brooklyn College in Brooklyn, where I grew up and spent the early part of my life.
And did you receive a degree from Brooklyn College?
Yes, a bachelor's.
And you said you retired, I think you said in 2006. Are you currently working anywhere?
No, I do volunteer work. I'm not employed.
In February of 1982, were you working as a reporter for the New York Post?
Yes,
When I say the name Kathy Durst, is that a name that you recognize?
yes,
When I say the name Robert Durst, is that a name that you recognize?
yes.
And when I bring up Kathy Durst's disappearance, is that a story that you were involved in reporting on in 1982?
Yes.
Do you remember how you first became involved in writing and investigating that story?
I was on rewrite at the Post, assigned to a desk. You know, when stories came in, we assigned it to different reporters, and I was told that a woman named Kathy Durst had disappeared, and to see what I could find out.
And when you say you're on rewriting, what does that mean?
It's basically standard reporting, but you're in the office making calls. Reporters who are out on different beats or on the street covering stories will phone into you, and you take notes and, write the stories for them because they're busy running around.
Did you work with another reporter at the time named Charles Lockman? And although that is pronounced Lockman, the spelling is Lachman.
Yes, he was a fellow reporter.
And do you recall if you worked with him on this story involving Kathy Durst's disappearance?
After the first story that I worked on, he became involved in the story.
And I'm going to be discussing with you your work that you did related to your reporting on that case. Have you had a chance previously to review the articles that either you wrote yourself or that you had a byline with Mr. Lockman?
Yes.
And do you recall, ma'am, if you had contact and personally interviewed Robert Durst?
Yes.
Do you remember, in terms of the reporting that was going on, if, to the best of your knowledge, you were the first reporter to interview Mr. Durst regarding the disappearance of his wife?
I was the first reporter, yeah.
And do you remember how that came about? How did you end up interviewing Mr.
Well, I was given the assignment, as I mentioned, and I looked around for phone numbers, and I found a number for Mr. Durst, and I phoned his home.
And when you called him, did you have a conversation with him?
Yes.
And did you report that conversation in an article that you wrote in the New York Post dated February 8, 1982, entitled Mystery of Missing Beauty? And then, I don't know what you call the thing right below, the subtitle. Is that what it's called?
The subheading?
The subheading, is that what you call the next line after the headline of the story?
Yeah.
Titled Realtor's Wife Vanishes and Search Begins?
Yeah.
And ma'am, do you recall, in this article, you had a chance to go through the article recently this morning, is that correct?
Right.
And in terms of the information that you are getting about what happened to Kathy Durst, is that information that you received and reported in that article that came directly from your conversation with Robert Durst?
Yes.
As you sit here today, do you have a full and complete memory of everything Mr. Durst told you in that article?
I don't remember the conversation, but I wrote the article based on the notes I took during that conversation with him.
And were the notes that you would take in that conversation, they have been contemporaneous when you were speaking to Mr. Durst?
Yes.
And how important is it as a reporter in terms of being accurate in particularly quoting what the individual you're interviewing has told you?
That's what you do for a living. You have to be accurate.
And what care did you take in making sure that when you would interview people and write notes, that in fact they were accurate?
I took notes. I don't quite understand what you're asking.
I'm basically asking you that you said it's important. So I'm asking you, in terms of how you approach the job, did you treat it with that same importance?
Oh, I treated it, with great respect for the person I was talking to, and great respect for myself as a journalist.
And, ma'am, at the time that you interviewed Mr. Durst, is it fair to say that you did not have much of an understanding of the surrounding facts about his wife's disappearance?
Correct.
And is it also fair to say that although you were accurate in what Mr. Durst told you, you cannot attest to the accuracy or the veracity of what he was telling you?
Correct.
They have stipulated that they do not mind me being the one to read it into evidence rather than the witness. In the interest of time and just effort by the witness, it's a little bit small on the screen. And we're gonna mark it 7.
And we are happy to allow Mr. Williams to be heard, because we don't hear them. You may proceed to read the article to the record.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mystery of the Missing Beauty by Marsha Kranes. Subheading, Realtor's Wife Vanishes and Search Begins. The beautiful wife of a wealthy Manhattan real estate developer has disappeared. For the court reporter's sake, Your Honor, I'm gonna, if I read it faster than she can record it. We'll be giving her the copy of this, so I would assume that I can read it in a more rapid tone if she will have it. Does that make sense?
No, read it. Read it slowly.
Okay. I'm always interested in the court's time, Ron. I'm trying to...
No, I appreciate that, but not at the expense of understanding.
All right, I will read it.
Proceed.
The beautiful wife of a wealthy Manhattan real estate developer has disappeared. A short time later, her husband, Robert, 38, son of real estate tycoon Seymour Durst, and third-generation developer with the Beverly Hills Corporation, spoke with her by phone from their weekend retreat in Westchester. And that, says Durst, is the last anyone knows of his attractive, 5'5", 120-pound wife. The next morning, she failed to show up for classes at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, where she is due to graduate in May. So, ma'am, am I correct that that information that I just read to you came from Mr. Durst during that conversation?
All the information in that article came from my notes from the conversation with Mr. Durst.
And meaning Mr. Durst told you that?
Yes, Mr. Durst told me that.
Thank you, I shouldn't have interrupted you. The next morning, she failed to show up. No, her car. Oh, I'm sorry, her car, a red Mercedes she drove to school, was still parked in its assigned spot in a nearby garage. Her clothes and jewelry were in the apartment untouched. The knapsack she traveled with and her toothbrush were still there too. No notes were found, and none of her friends or relatives has heard from her, said Durst. Even more puzzling, he noted, is no one recalls seeing her leave their building. He believes Kathy, quote, left the apartment to, quote, go to a store or to visit a friend, unquote, and that something happened. And that then something happened. Quote, I used to tell her she dressed too nicely, unquote, he said. Quote, I told her she attracted too much attention. If someone were looking for someone who looked wealthy, it would be her, unquote, said Durst. When she left their country home in posh South Salem, she was dressed in a long, beige down coat, brown suede boots, blue jeans, and a blouse. She was also wearing diamond earrings and two thin gold chains. Quote, she wore the diamond earrings everywhere, even to the hospital in the Bronx. Not the safest place in the whole world, unquote, said Durst. The perplexed Durst has contacted the police and is planning to hire a private detective. He is certain his wife did not run away. Quote, we had the same problems most married people have, unquote, he said. Quote, we've had our arguments, unquote. We've had our arguments and disagreements, but nothing new or unusual, unquote. At times during their 9-year marriage, quote, she's gotten angry and stayed at a friend's house overnight, but she's never disappeared, never anything like this, unquote, he said. He urged anyone with information to contact his office, and if they give the number, or Detective Struck of the 20th Precinct, and they give another phone number. Ma'am, having had this article read, to the best of your memory, is that an accurate recitation of your interview with Mr. Durst?
I don't remember the conversation. I just know that everything in that article came from my notes.
And again, ma'am, although you do not remember as you sit here and speak various facts, because you indicated your responsibilities as a journalist to make sure that your articles are sourced and accurately reported, is there anything about that article which would lead you to believe that it was not, in fact, accurately reported?
It's absolutely accurately reported.
Ma'am, is that the only time, to the best of your memory, that you personally spoke to Mr. Durst?
Yes.
Did you continue on the story after this article on February 8th?
Yes, on rewrite. I wrote stories with a reporter, Charles Lockman, who was out covering it and gathering information. And he phoned it in to me, and I wrote the articles.
There are other articles where the two of you share a byline, is that right?
Yes.
Is there any significance to the fact that on those other articles, Mr. Lockman's byline is first?
Yes, because he was the source of the information, and I was the rewrite person, so my name was second.
So, for the purpose of the courtroom, would it be fair to say, ma'am, that in the subsequent articles where you are reporting, as an example, John Smith said blank, you would not have spoken to John Smith? That would have been Charles Lockwood speaking to John Smith and relaying to you either by notes or verbally what Mr. Smith had said.
Correct.
Now, other than the subsequent articles which you have the second guideline of Mr. Lockwood, do you have any other involvement in this case?
No.
Were you ever contacted by the New York Police Department?
No.
Were you ever contacted by any law enforcement agency in this case prior to 2016?
2001?
I'm sorry, prior to 2015.
No.
Ma'am, in terms of your testimony in coming to court today, was this something that you wanted to do?
No.
Is it fair to say that you agreed to come after we explained to you that our options were either subpoena or voluntary?
Right.
Is it fair to say that in that exchange that at certain points in this case, I was not your favorite person?
Very true.
Today, am I on the upside or the downside?
You're on the upside.
On the upside. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
I have a question. Do you think you recognize Mr. Durst? Saw him again?
I see a gentleman who's sitting there who may be Mr. Durst, but I couldn't say that. I've never seen him in person.
You talked to him on the phone? You talked to him on the phone?
Yes.
Not in person.
Right.
Okay. Yes.
Hi.
David Chestnut. Mr. Willen took the best part of my cross by establishing that you didn't like him. Moving forward from there. You really, when all this started, when you were getting communications from police and from Mr. Willen's office, only had a vague memory of this event. Is that fair?
That's fair.
You covered hundreds and hundreds of stories, correct?
Correct.
Were you a crime beat reporter at the time, or were you a real estate reporter because Mr. Durst was associated with real estate? You got involved. What was the reason you were assigned this?
At that point, I was on rewrite, but I've been a street reporter, I've been a court reporter, I've covered the gambit.
This was in the early 80s in New York? Is that?
Yes.
And in the early 80s in New York, there was a big problem with street crime, wasn't there?
I think there's always a problem with street crime in New York.
But it's gotten better over the years.
Yeah.
That's their state. You said that you had some memory of the Durst matter, not just from what you worked on, but you may have watched part of the Jinx. Is that correct?
I did watch part of it, yeah.
You commented in previous discussions with the police that a lot of your sources were people on the streets. Is that correct? For stories? Remember that?
Right, not in this particular case, but yes.
Okay. In this particular case, you used some old-fashioned reporting skills and actually looked in a phone book, which for the younger people here is a book that had people's phone numbers in it, and you could call them, correct?
Yeah, you used the main phone book or a reverse directory, I'm not sure which.
You don't remember in the case of Mr. Durst how you found his number?
Well, it was either a phone book or a reverse phone directory.
Okay, and you called the number that showed up for Mr. Durst, correct?
Correct.
And a man answered, correct?
I'm not sure if I left a message or if I got him immediately, but at some point, I either spoke to him or he called me back after I left the message.
And I think you may have said previously in speaking to the authorities that you were surprised to get him on the phone, correct?
I think I said that, yes.
Okay. If someone was anxiously waiting to hear from someone that was missing, they might stay by the phone and wait for a phone call, correct?
Correct?
So it would not be surprising at the time that a man who told you he was very concerned about where his wife's whereabouts were to answer the phone in case it was either her or someone with information, correct?
Correct, but you would not necessarily expect him to continue talking to me after I identified myself.
Except if the person wanted to get a message out about his missing wife, correct?
Correct.
And your newspaper, by the tone of the articles that I've read, not only the one that you originally gathered the information for, but the follow-up articles, you were sending a message out about the missing wife, correct?
Absolutely.
So, even though you were surprised that he talked to you as a reporter, now that you think about it, he was actually cooperating with you in the writing of your story. Is that a fair statement?
He was providing me with information that he wanted me to publish in the paper.
Right, he didn't say, don't talk to me, leave me alone, I don't want to talk to you, and anything like that. To the contrary, he was cooperative.
He was speaking to me.
Did he refuse to answer any questions that you asked?
I don't recall.
Or did you have a chance to review your notes?
I don't have my notes any longer. I retired a long time ago.
So your notes from these events have been destroyed, for lack of a better word.
Right.
But you have no reason to believe that he was uncooperative, correct?
He was talking to me.
Now, you said that Mr. Lockman was the fact gatherer for the follow-up stories, correct?
Correct.
And he would relay the information that he gathered to you so that you could write the follow-up stories, correct?
Correct.
And do you have memory, after having reviewed those follow-up stories, of the information that was conveyed to you by Mr. Lockman?
I independently don't remember.
Do you have any reason to believe that what you wrote in those articles that was conveyed to you by Mr. Lockman was inaccurate?
I think it fairly represented what he relayed to me.
So you were writing at the time to convey the facts as they were conveyed to you, correct?
Correct.
Truthfully, correct?
Truthfully.
No fake news.
Okay.
Do you remember in your conversation with Mr. Durst or Mr. Lackman being informed that there was a detective struck that was involved investigating the situation?
Mr. Durst had given me that information on the phone.
And he explained to you that that was the investigating police officer, correct?
That was, he gave me the detective's number to call for anybody who might have information.
Do you recall Mr. Durst informing you that he was concerned that his wife drew too much attention to her wealth by the way she dressed and the accessories that she wore?
It was recorded in my story from my notes.
And your goal in writing the story was to include as much information as you could in order to present a fair accounting of the events that were occurring at the time, based on your sources.
A fair accounting of what Mr. Durst told me, which I attributed to him in my article.
Nothing further.
Ma'am, as you sit here, do you have any idea, can you tell us what Mr. Durst's motivations might have been for the things that he told you?
No.
As you sit here today, do you know if what he told you was truthful?
No.
All right. No further questions, Your Honor.
Anything else? No, the witness will be accused as far as Mr. Durst is
Yes.
concerned.
Your Honor, we've completed the testimony of Marsha Kranes. I'd ask that we mark people 75B. It's a one-sheet exhibit sheet. It references the following. We'll mark people 75C as a one-page article. In the video, this was people 67. One moment. Your Honor, the next witness will be another additional examination video. I'd like to mark as People's 76, the DVD of the testimony of Miriam Barnes. The testimony is about 2 hours, so we cannot complete it today. Mark the transcript as 76A. And we've changed course, so I'll get a transcript to the court.
Now I understand. Yes, please.
May I approach?
Yeah.
Your Honor, playing People 76, testimony of Miriam Barnes.
Marsha Kranes, Your Honor.
Yes.
That's good.
Susan Berman is present, represented by his counsel, Mr. Bailey, and Mr. Lewis, the people, and Cornelius, and Mr. Yaroslavsky, and the next witness, please.
The people call Miriam Barnes.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you're about to give in the trial before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Please be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name.
My first name is Miriam, M-I-R-I-A-M. My last name is Barnes, B-A-R-N-E-S.
Can you just move your seat closer to the mic, please? Thank you.
Can I make it a little louder to me?
Yes, please move it, so that you're comfortable. Mr. Bailey, you may proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Barnes. You seem to have a nice soft voice. If you please do your best to speak into the microphone so everybody can hear you, okay?
Yes.
If you don't understand something I'm asking you, or if I ask you something that's confusing, I tend to do that sometimes, just let me know, please, okay? I'm also going to be asking you about some events that occurred many years ago. You know that I don't remember. This is a perfectly acceptable answer, okay?
Yes.
But I would like you to do your best to try to recollect to the best of your recollection and tell us your most honest answers. And if you have a problem remembering something, just let us know. Okay?
Okay.
How old are you?
66.
And what is your occupation?
I'm a psychiatric social worker.
What is your background, very briefly, what is your background that qualifies you to the list?
It's a second career. I went back to school to NYU and got my master's degree. And I started school in 2005, graduated in 2007, and I've been working ever since as a psychiatric social worker, which is a different career than I had before. I was a creative director of film, I was a film executive.
And did you say you went to NYU?
Yes.
And that was for your master's degree?
Yes.
Where did you go prior?
I went to a couple of different schools, but I graduated from Queens College in New York.
What was your degree?
A BA in art, studio art, art history, and English.
How many many years were you at NYU?
2.
2 years. And did you eventually obtain your master's degree in education there?
No, I got a master's degree in social work.
I'm sorry, social work. Where do you currently live?
I live in Manhattan.
I'm going to take you back to the 1970s. Where were you living in the 1970s?
I was living on Beekman Place
Where is Beacon?
in Manhattan.
Which part of Manhattan is Beacon Place?
It's between 50th and 51st and off First Avenue, for sure.
Okay.
And then the FDR Drive.
Do you remember approximately when you moved into that residence on Beekman Place?
Maybe 74, something like that. 75.
Okay. Is that 32 Beekman Place?
32 Beekman.
Did you live there with anyone or no?
No, it was a tiny studio apartment.
It was an apartment building?
Yeah, it's like a townhouse, maybe 4 floors.
There was multiple units within the
Yes.
building?
There were 2 buildings owned by the same man, Eugene Baird, and they were right next door to each other.
So in the 1970s, while you were living at Beekman Place, what was your occupation back then?
I was a junior art director at an advertising agency.
Did you always, from 1970 until today, reside in Manhattan?
No,
No. Did you eventually move somewhere?
I moved to Los Angeles.
What year approximately was it that you moved to Los Angeles?
The end of the 80s, about 88.
And why did you?
I was transferred by New Line Cinema.
And where did you live when you moved to Los Angeles?
My first apartment was in Brentwood.
Right. Okay. And did you have another apartment in a different area of Los Angeles?
Yes, I had 2. Then I moved to rented a house in Beverly Glen. Then I moved to Studio City while I was planning to buy a house in West Hollywood.
For how many years approximately was it that you stayed in Los Angeles?
About 15,
15 years?
something like that, yeah.
Where did you go after those 15 years expired?
I came back to New York
Approximately what year was it that you moved back to?
about 2003.
And have you been residing in New York continuously from the time you moved back in approximately 2003 until today?
Yes.
Do you know, if I say the name Susan Berman, do you know that person?
I did, yes.
I have a photograph, may I mark this as People's 10, Your Honor? I'm sorry, 11?
11? Yes.
I'm showing you what has been marked as People's 11. It should appear on the screen right in front of you.
Yes.
Do you see the woman in the center of that photograph?
Yes, it's Susan.
Do you recognize the woman who has her arm around?
Yes, but not because I knew her personally.
Who was that?
That's Kathy Durst.
What about the gentleman on the other side of Susan? Do you recognize him?
From the newspaper articles and such, yes. As Susan would call him, Bob Durst.
Okay. How did you know Susan?
She lived, when I lived at 32 Beekman Place, she moved into the building, the other building that this man owned.
Was it the same building at 32?
No, it was, 2 little buildings right next door to each other, 2 little townhouses that were transferred in, were made into studio apartments.
Okay. So she lived in the same
Complex.
the same complex that you lived in,
Yeah, yeah,
but in an adjoining separate structure that was next door to you.
yeah.
Okay. Approximately what year was it that she moved in?
I don't really remember. I was living here before she moved in.
Was it sometime in the 1970s though?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Where did you meet her? Do you remember?
Yes, in the laundry room.
Describe that encounter.
I was doing my laundry. She came in to do her laundry. I was rather quiet and shy, and she, hi, I'm Susan, and I just moved here from blah, 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 and we just became fast friends.
And it's kind of hard to describe for the record, but you kind of got a little more animated when you were describing what Susan said. Can you describe for the court what was Susan's personality like?
She was vivacious and exuberant when she, was in her better moods. And she was very outgoing.
Okay.
When,
After you met her that first date, did you form some sort of a relationship with her?
Yeah.
What type of relationship did you guys have?
We became friends.
How close of friends would you say you were?
Well, I got married a year or two later, and she came to my wedding.
Okay. How often would you see her?
Oh, just running in and out of the buildings, we'd see each other, but we'd have dinner or things like that, or lunch, or, go to a party or something together.
It sounds like you had a social relationship.
Yeah.
Would she do things for you occasionally?
Yeah.
What type of things?
Well, once I was home from work with the flu, and she came knocking on my door, and she went to not that she cooked it, she went to the local deli and bought me a roast chicken and Jell-O, which was very strange to me, but that's what she did.
Were those the kind of things she would do?
Yes.
When you described her as being outgoing, what do you mean by that?
She had a lot to say. She would talk, and she had a big personality.
Was she a loyal person?
Oh yeah.
What do you mean?
Loyalty was very important to Susan, and she even would discuss that with me.
What types of things would she say to you?
That she learned loyalty from her father, and he meant everything to her.
What did you know about her father, if anything?
Well, I knew he was part of the Jewish mafia, and that he was from the Midwest, from Minnesota, and something, he was a partner at Flamingo Hotel when she was a little girl.
How often would Susan discuss with you her father?
Oh, he meant everything to her. And, she had pictures of him from other.
Was there a point in time in her life where Susan became aware of her father's background that you know?
Well, I know she was going to Washington for the Freedom of Information Act. I mean, she would tell me that she was writing something, and once the Freedom of Information Act was passed, that she could go and get information. She was doing it.
And what type of information did she tell you she was trying to get?
Oh, just on her father's background and his business and what he was doing and the whole 9 yards,
Were you ever with her when she was receiving any of that information?
No, she was in Washington.
Okay. Did you ever attend any parties that Susan threw?
Yeah.
Any stick out your mind?
Well, one in New York was for her book, and she threw it at Sammy's Romanian restaurant down on the Lower East Side.
Do you remember anyone who was there?
I know that Lorraine Newman was there, the actress.
Did you know her?
Not really. I mean, when I was living in LA, Susan took me to her house a couple of times because Susan had business with her. But, she wasn't really a friend of mine. I was an appendage.
Sammy's Romanian. Do you know his father?
Sammy, S-A-M-M-Y, and Romanian.
Like the,
It was like an ethnic restaurant. Susan loved that, and very somewhat Jewish. They made, Susan didn't drink, and they made, but I guess people, you could make chocolate egg creams at the table, and she liked that whole concept. I think it's still there. I don't.
as a friend, what was Susan like?
She was a good friend. She also had her had her ups and her downs, and she had a lot of issues, problems.
Tell us what you were about.
Susan would, when everything was good, it was good, but when she would fall apart mentally, she fell apart, and it was. We all came running.
What do you mean by that, Bill?
When she would call and say, I can't get out of bed and I can't do this, and we went to help. I would go, and I know other people came.
When in her life was it?
Well, I knew that she had mental health issues, but she used to see a psychiatrist in New York, but and she told me about it, and all her different, not going up to a certain level on a floor. But there was a time in the 80s where she came to New York to see her psychiatrist, and she was in very bad shape. And she called to come, and it was at Nick Jacobs' apartment. He wasn't there, but he let her stay there.
We'll talk about that in a second. But you mentioned Susan didn't like to go to a certain floor. Describe what you mean by that.
She was afraid of heights, bridges, and heights in buildings.
Were there other things or issues that Susan had that might be deemed out of the ordinary in terms of the way she acted or phobias she had?
I can't think right now. I mean, I know that she had allergies. We always had to check the food. No eggs, no this, no that. For Susan.
What was it like going to a restaurant with her?
She would inspect every, and grill the waiter to make sure that certain things weren't in her food.
Did you know, based on any interactions you had with her, how close she was to Lorraine Newman?
I knew they were good friends, but they had nothing to do with me. So.
And if I could spell for the court reporter, Lorraine Newman is L-A-R-A-I-N-E. Newman is N-E-W-M-A-N.
Pretty sure.
After you moved to California, did you ever see Susan while you were in California?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Yeah. Under what circumstances?
As a friend.
Would she come and visit with you?
Yes.
So you guys stayed friends while you were in California?
Yeah, she wouldn't come up to my Brentwood apartment because I lived on the 4th floor, but once I moved to a house and to other places, she came.
Okay. How close of friends would you describe yourself as?
We were good friends. I mean, even when my mom came to visit me in LA, she took Susan and I out to dinner.
Okay. You talked about how often you would see her. I want to ask you, how often would it be that you would talk on the phone with her?
Sometimes a lot. It could be every day. It could be more than once a day. And sometimes it would be a week or two. As you get older, you don't have, I'm not saying you, but for me, as I got older, I just didn't have that kind of time all the time to spend on the phone with friends.
Did you know who Robert and Kathleen Durst?
From Susan, yeah.
Okay. So, have you ever met Kathleen Durst?
No.
Okay. Have you ever met Robert Durst?
I know for sure once.
Okay. So what would Susan tell you about Robert and Kathleen Durst?
Well, she told me about her relationship with Bobby and how much it meant to her.
What did she say about it?
That, well, she adored him. He was everything to her, as far as a friend and like a brother.
Okay. Did she ever tell you how Robert and herself, Susan, had met each other?
When they were in college, as I'm pretty sure I remember it.
Did she ever tell you about anything she had in common in terms of her history with Robert?
Yes.
I believe I would ask you, what did she tell you about any common bonds they had had?
She told me that they bonded over the fact that both of their mothers committed suicide when they were young.
And she told you that she knew Robert, that Robert was married to Kathleen?
Yes, she told me.
Did she tell you anything about whether she did or did not like Kathleen?
She thought she loved her. She said, once she was like part of the family to Susan.
Okay. Did you ever become aware of Kathleen Durst's disappearance?
Yes.
How was it that you first became aware of Kathleen Durst's disappearance?
When I was living at Beacon Place, and Susan was, she had just moved to a larger apartment next door, a much more glamorous building. And I had just come home from work, and she called me and asked me to please come up to her apartment right away.
So, was it Susan Berman who was the first person that told you about Kathleen Durst's disappearance?
Yes.
And did you learn from Susan Berman about Kathleen Durst's disappearance before you had heard of that from any other source?
Yes.
Did she ever tell you anything about who could or couldn't call her Susan? Who was allowed to call her Susan?
Susie? Only Bobby was allowed to call her Susie.
That's what she told you? When Susan called you up to her apartment, I assume you went with her, right?
Yeah.
And you had some conversation with her, right?
Right.
We're going to talk about that conversation in a moment. And during that same conversation, is that when she informed you that Kathleen Durst was missing?
Yes.
Did it appear to you, based on the conversation that you were having with Susan Berman, including the nature of the conversation, what she was saying, her expression, the urgency of what she was saying, that this was a distant event or a very recent event?
It seemed to be something that was happening at that time.
Where were you prior to having this conversation?
At home, in my apartment.
Where had you been prior to being at your apartment?
At work.
And you came home from work and told the court what happened?
I got a phone call from Susan to come up to her apartment right away.
What exactly did she say when she was summoning you up to her apartment?
She needed to talk to me.
Was there anything out of the ordinary about the way she summoned you up to her apartment?
There was a sense of urgency.
Has she ever acted with that sense of urgency with you before?
Not really.
Okay. Did you go up?
Yeah.
Did you go up right away?
Yeah.
And when you got up, was Susan acting at all out of the ordinary based on the previous times you've been with her?
Yeah.
Tell us how.
Well, we were in the vestibule, the hallway of our apartment.
Okay.
So we didn't go into the living room, we didn't go into the kitchen. We were just in this long hallway. And she was pacing back and forth.
Have you ever seen her acting like that before?
Not like that, no.
What happened?
She asked me to sit down in 2 chairs, like, you know, not living room comfy chairs, just 2 chairs facing each other in the hallway.
Was that pre-set up like that before you got there?
Yeah,
Had you been to her apartment on more than one occasion previously?
that apartment, it was a new apartment. I had been up there, you know, there was a little bit of furniture, not a lot, you know, it was, I think she was fixing things and changing things.
Okay. When you got up there, there was these 2 chairs in the hallway. What's the first thing she said?
She asked me to sit down.
What's the next thing she said?
She said, I'm going to tell you something, but I need you not to ask me any questions.
She said, yeah.
Yeah?
Did you ask her any questions while she was telling you what she had to tell you?
No.
Why not?
Susan asked you to ask her any questions. You didn't ask her any questions.
You kind of laughed when you said that. Tell us why you're laughing. What do you mean by that?
And nerves. She was very definite. And she, you know, and very focused when she wanted to be. And when she was asking for something, she was a definite person.
Okay. So she told you, I'm going to tell you something. I need you not to ask me any questions. And you listened to what she had to say. You didn't ask her any questions.
Yes, I listened to what she had to say.
When you sat down, what did she say?
She said to me, I did something today.
Did she tell you whether she'd done it on her own or whether someone had asked her to do something?
She said she did it for Bobby.
Okay. How did she say that? What did she say?
She was, it took her a while to get it out. She was very nervous. And when Susan got nervous, she would pick at her lip. And she said, I did something today and did it for Bobby. And then her next statement was, if anything ever happened to me, Bobby did it.
While she was saying this, you said she was picking on her lip?
Yeah.
Had you noticed that habit in her previously?
Yeah.
Under what circumstances during previous encounters you had with her when she picked her lip?
That was part of her, you know, but when she would get nervous or wanted very serious, she would do this picking at her lip.
How certain are you that Susan said, Bobby asked me to do something and I did something today?
It's certain, very certain.
Do you have any doubt in your mind that she said that to you?
No.
How certain are you as you sit here today that Susan said, if something happens, Susan said, if something happens, Bobby did it?
I'm very certain.
Do you have any doubt in your mind?
No.
Did Susan elaborate on what she had done to help others?
No.
Did Susan, by her words, expressions, or any other means, indicate to you how recent it was what she had done to her body?
I knew she had done it that day.
How did you know?
She said today, you know.
So she said, I did something today.
She said, I did something today, Bobby, and if anything ever happens to Bobby, did it.
Did she say or indicate to you in any manner, to give you any idea of what she had done, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing?
Didn't sound like a good thing, just from that whole result of what was going on in the room. But she didn't say anything bad, good, or indifferent, and I couldn't ask any questions.
What you heard, based on you being there, and you hearing what you heard, and you seeing what you observed, in your mind, what she was indicating was what she did was bad. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
conversation?
Yes.
Did Susan Berman ever bring up this topic again with you after that conversation ended?
She would mention about Kathy being missing, but nothing, and when she first told me, I didn't think that, it just wasn't in my sphere, my world, that somebody would do something.
Let me ask you this. When you first heard what Susan had told you, in your mind, did you know if the information was real or not?
No,
Why not?
because sometimes Susan could be larger than life and very dramatic, and I didn't know.
How long was this conversation approximately?
I was in the apartment for about a half hour.
I don't think I asked you. What year did this conversation occur? Do you recall?
70s, I don't know. It has to be in the 70s because it was before I was getting married, and it was before I got married.
Well, what year did you?
I've been divorced longer than I was married, so I got married, I think, in 75, 76.
Let me ask you, are you more certain of exactly when this conversation took place, or are you more certain about what was said?
I'm more certain of what was said.
And let me ask you this. How certain are you that whenever this conversation happened, was it the same period of time that Kathleen Durst was?
Yes, because then it was in the newspaper a little while later.
So let me ask you this. Eventually, at some point, did you read about, hear about in the media Kathleen Durst's disappearance in New York?
Yeah.
And was it a big story at the time in New York?
Yeah.
And did you, that time period that you read and heard about it, was that generally the same time period that this conversation took place? Like the same year?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Within the same weeks?
Yeah.
Okay. But the conversation, I believe you testified, I'm not sure it's correct, occurred prior to you reading and hearing about this?
Yes.
Okay. Did you come forward to any law enforcement with this information in 1982?
No.
Why not?
In 1982.
Oh, I'm sorry. Listen, forget I asked you. May I rephrase the question?
You may.
Did you come forward with this information to law enforcement at this general time frame of when you had this conversation? That year?
No.
Why not?
I just couldn't fathom that it was believable. And I was very young. I was in my 20s. I was getting married very soon. I just didn't think that could really happen to people I knew.
Were you a different person back then than you are today?
Of course.
How?
I was very young. I was just starting out in the world, and getting married and starting out with working and things like that. And it was just a different time.
You said you were approximately in your 20s.
Yeah.
In your mind, 20-year-old back then, given whatever your background was at that time, and who you were, what was going on in your life, did it even dawn on you that maybe you should come forth to someone with this information?
No.
Given your relationship with Susan Berman, did a part of you either wanted to or didn't want to believe that she had done something bad to help Bob?
couldn't fathom that either she or Bobby would have done something at that time.
Other than I asked you about law enforcement, but at this point in time in your life, did you tell anyone else about this conversation?
Not really, no. No. If anybody may have said to my ex-husband, but I wouldn't even remember he's been dead for many years.
Notwithstanding the fact that you never told anyone back at that period of time, are you being truthful today as to what Susan Berman told you?
Yes.
Do you remember when Susan Berman at some point left New York and sold her apartment on the
About, yeah.
Were you still living in New York City at the time?
Yes, it was.
And I think you testified that at this period of time that you still maintain contact with her?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember who Susan was living with when she moved to California?
She wasn't living with anybody. No, she wasn't living with anybody.
Did you know her when she was married?
Yes, I knew her when she was married.
Who was she married to?
Mr.
You talked about meeting, Robert Durst. How many occasions?
The only time I can remember is once.
Tell us about it.
Susan came to New York. She was staying at Nick Chavin's apartment. She was ill, she was decompensated. And speaking to the psychiatrist, and she called a lot of friends and asked us to be there, and he was there.
Okay. Was there anything out of the ordinary about your interaction?
I didn't have a one-on-one with him.
What was he doing?
He was just, taking care of Susan and calling her Susie and da-da-da-da. And then at a certain point, he went into the bathroom. When he came out of the bathroom, his pants were open. And he was like, nothing I wasn't offended by it. I wasn't, it was just like, personally, you say this guy's an asshole.
When you say his pants were open, were his genitals exposed?
No. But it was just like, zip up, what's your problem,
Are you saying that he walked out of the bathroom with
There was an arrogance about it.
He walked out of the bathroom with his pants open with a room full of people?
Yeah.
Did he seem to care about it?
No.
Did you ever visit Susan Berman while she was sick at any point in New York?
Yeah, that's when
I'm sorry?
when I went to the apartment, when I went to the James
So
apartment.
that's the time you're talking about. So was this before or after you moved to California in approximately 1980?
I was still living in New York.
So before 1980?
Yeah.
Did Susan Berman ever tell you anything about Robert Durst giving her any money?
Yes.
What did she tell you?
When Susan was always out of money, and when she needed money, Bobby helped her out.
Did she tell you, was there any period of time where she told you about him giving her any significant amount?
I never asked her how much. I just didn't feel it was my business. And I know that before she died, she had told me that he had given her some money.
So, at some point, obviously, you were aware that Susan was killed, right?
Yes.
conversations you had with her where she informed you that Robert Durst had given her money, how close in time were those conversations to when she was killed?
Within a few weeks.
You didn't discuss any amounts?
No, I know, I just didn't answer. That was not my business.
How close were Robert Durst and Susan Berman based on your conversations?
Very close. She hadn't seen him in a very long, quite a while, when she told me that he came across with this money for her.
Did you know Nick Chabin?
Not personally, no.
Did you ever hear about Nick Chabin?
Of course.
From Susan?
Of course.
Based on what she told you, how close were Susan Berman and Nick Chabin?
They were close because she took credit for making his career in San Francisco.
Okay. Based on your conversations with Susan, how close, if you know, were Nick Chabin and Robert Durst?
They were good friends.
Yeah, and was this the relationships between Susan Berman and Nick Chabin and Robert Durst, were these prior to leaving New York for California?
Oh, yeah.
Did Susan Berman ever mention to you again Kathleen Durst's disappearance after that one conversation?
Yes.
How often or when?
Before she died.
What did she say?
She was calling me a lot. Everybody knew Susan was broke. I didn't have any money to give her.
When you say she was broke, you mean close in time to her death?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, please continue.
I mean, I know that she was given some money, but she had been broke for quite a long time. And all I could do for her was, if I was going to the supermarket, ask her, what I could pick up for her, and she would come to my house and say, do you have the old bags and pocketbooks or something that, I might like, that I could use? And I would give them, But she was calling me and talking about coming to New York. And first the conversation was, I'm going, because I'm going to meet this guy, and like a blind date or something that I've been talking to or something, and in my head I was going, Susan, you don't have a pot to pee in. You're going to New York?
During this conversation you had with her, did she discuss Kathleen Durst's disappearance?
Yeah, all of a sudden the conversation switched to, I'm going to New York because they want to question me about Kathleen.
And when she said they want to question you, was she specifically saying the police wanted to speak with her about Kathy, or was it she didn't say whether it was police or someone else?
She didn't say.
How did you hear about Susan's death?
She was supposed to be at my house for a Christmas party.
What happened?
And she didn't show. And I had a lot of people at my house. And by the end of the day, she was leaving, and everybody was starting to peter out, and I ran upstairs in my house, and I heard the phone ringing, and picked it up, and the guy who, and I can't think of his name, who used to cut both Susan and my hair, called to tell me.
What was your reaction?
I was very upset.
Were you just told she died, or were you told she was murdered?
I was told she was murdered.
Did you ever, what if anything did you think about Robert Durst's involvement at that time when you got that phone call?
Nothing.
Did this previous conversation come to your mind?
Nothing.
Did it at some point come to your mind?
Yes.
When was it that you realized the significance of this conversation you had with Susan Berman?
The day I was sitting in the chapel at the cemetery at Susan's funeral.
What went through your mind?
People were jabbering about some new boyfriend that she had that couldn't, and I'm going, what the heck? And then I was just going through my head, all these things, and I remembered the conversation, and it kept remembering it as I drove back, it was in my car driving back home.
Did you realize at that point in time, you said the conversation, I assume you're talking about the conversation you had with Susan Berman in her apartment where she told you I did something for Bob? Yes?
Yes.
Did you understand the significance of that moment when you're in your car driving home from the feel of the information that you had?
I did, but I still needed time to think about it.
What did you need to think?
It was just so frightening to me. The whole situation of Susan being murdered and then me realizing and remembering what had been said to me.
Did you, in your mind, come to believe who was responsible for Susan?
In my mind,
Yeah.
yeah,
Who was it?
Robert Durst.
Did you, at that point in time, after Susan Berman's funeral, go to the police and say, I have this information you need to know?
No,
Why not?
because I was scared of him.
What in particular were you afraid of?
I didn't run in their circles. I didn't have that kind of money, and I knew he was a very wealthy man. And he would do whatever he wanted to somebody, and I was very scared.
How scared?
Very scared.
Please.
Your Honor, it's about 4:30. I've stopped at 45 minutes and 8 seconds.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock. On any subject connected with this case, do not form or express any opinion on the case. See you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Step of, in other words, I have, I've ruled that the prior consistent statement is admissible. I understand that you wish to do talk about the constitutionality, and we can do that tomorrow. But the second step, if something is admitted by hearsay exception, then the question becomes whether it is testimonial. I can hear you out. I've looked at the authorities. I didn't know what you got there, but you certainly can bring it up tomorrow at 8:30. So we'll talk tomorrow at 8:30.
Your Honor, would there be a way to make it 8:45?
Yeah, 8:45 is fine.
Thank you.
8:45 tomorrow. Department 1 is adjourned.